Welcome to the Green Ring, and thanks for watching this note-by-note dissection of Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen. This video is 13th in a series of 16 devoted to Die Walküre Act 1. Built on nearly 2 centuries of scholarly literature, it's a massive journey I hope you'll take with me when I'm dedicated to finishing. For an explanation of who I am, and more on the reasons for this series, please check the preface video, first in a group of 6, building a foundation to this in-depth analysis. Before diving into this video, you may want to watch the case for Erda, the case against Wotan, and the case for Loge, which present my views on how and why Wagner manipulates his musical syntax as he does, in the process identifying key morphemes which I believe define the entire work. You'll find explanations for why the terms leitmotif, motif, and motive have been replaced by morpheme, module, and cell in the chapter entitled Music as Text. Links are provided in the comments below. My aim is to mount subsequent videos each week with breaks of approximately a month between each drama's acts until the entire ring is analyzed. We pick up where we left off just as the wind blows open the door to Hunding's dwelling, page 93 in Dover's full score. The door flung open is the only real physical action since Sieglinde's entrance. It's accompanied by a powerful burst of orchestral sound which cuts off the string's ascent on the next downbeat with a sharp quaver chord. Supported by a diminished minor 7th breve horn woodwind chord, timpani strikes double trumpets, trombones as they shout a triplet chord pulse which attenuates through a pair of duple quavers, then a last 3 off the beat. At the same time, all 6 Rheingold harps rise on 4 octavo demi-semiquaver arpeggios, the last punctuated in a demi-semiquaver scalar flourish across strings, violins, violas rising, low strings falling into a quaver sting on the next downbeat. With it, rising harp arpeggios slow to a pair in septuplet semiquavers as, after a crotchet rest, Sieglinde fears someone has either gone out or come in, certainly thinking of Hunding or his minions. Her 2 low ash interval strophes rise on thirds, the second a tritone lower and overlapping into the next measure as the woodwind horn chords assume a more delicate syncopated crotchet pulsation, harps tracing a broad rising falling septuplet arpeggiated sign, 3 abandoning its descent to the remaining 3. With the next measure, the woodwind horn pulse sinks a telling octave, while 3 harps sound another natural sign, thinned in the next 2 measures to a pair of harps. A lighter woodwind contingent subtly alters the minor 7th harmony to a gentle major 7th breve, Siegmund assuring her that no one has gone, his reverse ash interval sinking a third. In the next measure, he asserts someone has come instead, begun a third below his prior note, creating a Welsung triad to move with eerily unconscious prescience through a ringless pulse, sweetly distorted by its rising 6th, the unseen enemy stalking them both. With his last pitch on the next downbeat, first chair harps pass to a duo of seconds for the next 2 sine waves, 1 per measure. With the second, he repeats ringlust, a low ash interval added, in the middle of which he rests a quaver to punch der Lenz, again on that sweetly rising major 6th, its poignancy heightened by a mode shift to tonic major on its downbeat. With that, woodwinds shift to their higher voices, joined by a single horn, while a lone harp drifts up a triplet quaver arpeggio to sink over the next measure as Siegmund completes his vocal on a barrier, its falling interval that reassuring 6th. With his final semi-breve on the next downbeat, 1st and 4th harp trade similar rising arpeggios in the following 2 measures, now harmonized by woodwinds in a glowing anticipatory major 7th, a 3rd flute adding subtle gleam to the brief crescendo's final semi-breve. This passage, together with the following love music, inspires Kobe to an unusual burst of poetic eloquence. The landscape is illuminated by the moon. Its silver sheen flows down the hills and quivers along the meadows whose grasses tremble in the breeze. All nature seems to be throbbing in unison with the hearts of the lovers. Apart from the moon reference, nothing like this appears in the stage directions or, for that matter, in the following lyrics. Rather, it's the music which inspires this flood of analytic hyperbole, and the Meister devotes much attentive detail to its brief introduction, modulating it with lapidary precision to characterize both the desired stage effect and the lover's reaction to it. Every production available on video attempts to honor this richness, if none of their varied results capture the music's thrill with anything like Kobe's gush. As in much of his Ring, Charot's approach is quasi-realistic and practical, a set element sliding aside to reveal the requested moon and a bit of greenery. Valencia's huge projection is the only other instance honoring these two details, its door provided by revolving one of its rear projection screens, an effect more symbolic than credible. Most other approaches don't bother with either door or moon, favoring instead stylized lighting and set adjustments, which seek to approximate the mood change. The Copenhagen Ring is more successful up to a point. Siegmund hefts a chair, smashing the house's front window so he and Sieglinde may walk through a revolving set whose focus changes to the garden beyond, strewn with rose petals. Trees drop from the fly space, unfortunately plopping the sword smack under Siegmund's nose, thus resurrecting the problem of why, rather than pull it out on the spot, he indulges in a protracted love duet. This lack of stagecraft has apparently been chronic. As long ago as 1949, Newman was already goaded to comment, "At this point the great door flies open, for no better reason, one is inclined to think at first, than a desire on Wagner's part to create a striking stage effect. We soon realize, however, it is symbolic rather than realistic." From this point, the act's remainder develops that seamless musical texture so far devoted exclusively either to depictions of nature or moments of high emotional abandon, which style comes to dominate much of Walküre, most of Siegfried, and virtually all of Götterdämmerung. In this case, Erda's natural world takes hold of the lovers, though they repeatedly somersault between naive purity and the doom-laden fate prescribed them by Wotan. The entrance of spring prepared by the immediately previous segment comes as a delicious harmonic surprise, its sustained enharmonic F-sharp major cadence evaded by instead slipping into B-flat, its mediant, along with another syntactic innovation. Cellos initiate a distinctive wave module heard only these 4 times, each wave strophe rising in tonic steps against a similarly descending horn woodwind pulsation. This isn't a repeating morpheme in the strictest sense, yet Cook points out it develops the Rhine Maiden's wave as evolved through Loge's Rheingold panegyric to become the spear-influenced cells of the Walküre Act I prelude. Sabor grasps only this last similarity, and no other commentator so much as notices the module, though its several elements have roots deep in the tetralogy's syntax. Its arpeggiated rise, drawn from Rhine Maidens and panegyric, looks all the way back to the Rheingold prelude and Erda herself, thus making it rather different from its spear-related Walküre module, whose syntax begins not with an arpeggio but an abruptly rising scale. Both progress through a spear descent, whose giant-like turn informs their lowest points, the Maiden's wave reflecting analogous cells. 2 even subtler details confirm this new wave owes more to Erda than Wotan. As segmented into 4 discs, first violins sweeten the 4 repetitions by syncing with them on dotted minim chords, a reminder of Rheingold's prelude horns, their falling-rising oppositions repeating through every measure of that earlier passage. Walküre echoes that motion in horn woodwind descents, their pulsing a close cousin to Rheingold's violin oscillation, suggesting the gold shimmer. The Meister emphasizes this resemblance by slurring the horn woodwind triplets as a succession of two-note cells, to confirm that, like the Rheingold sparkle, they derive from Loge's own gleaming syntax. In suggesting the moon's glow, a reflection of sunlight fundamental to nature as is the gold, brings to mind the fire god's taunts for Albrecht. Den Mond und Stern und die strahlende Sonne, sie auch dürfen nicht anders, dienen müssen sie dir. This in turn evokes the mythic giant, predecessor to Fasolt and Fafnir, who bargains for Freya, the sun and the moon, only to be defeated by nature. Here in Walküre, a storm has become the Earth Mother's paradise, both in this place and beyond it, with its potential to conquer giants, Nibelungs, and gods alike. The music separating Walküre's prelude from this extended love duet includes only 3 Rheingold morphemes audiences might recognize, those being Donner's Thunder, Valhalla Part 1, and The Sword, thanks to which perceptive viewers already suspect the pair's consanguinity. Siegmund, at least, is clearly Wotan's son, but Sieglinde's case is darker. Her report of the god's affectionate look is a smoking gun, to be sure, but not the definitive proof there is for this guest she knows only as Wewald. Uncertainty Wagner juggles throughout the act's remainder to soften the incestuous blow at its end. Having ramped up sympathy for the lovers' doleful situation, then identify their potential rescue in the sword, he now focuses on their budding passion. The following solo, generally called Winterstürme, that being the first word of its initial phrase, injects sly foreshadowing with such comments as Siegmund's metaphor of spring's abrupt inundation. Zu seiner Schwester schwang sich her, die Liebe lockte den Lenz. Again through simile, he also identifies Sieglinde with his earlier narrative's unsuccessful rescue, a disaster for which he obviously means to atone by taking her as his bride. Die brautliche Schwester befreitet der Bruder, zertrümmert liegt, was je sie getrennt. Most analysts believe Wagner wholeheartedly endorsed and pardoned the twins' incest, and Spencer Millington take this a step further. Siegmund and Sieglinde recognize each other as siblings, and enact the imagery of this duet in an incestuous relationship prefigured and hence sanctioned by nature herself. They'd have been more accurate to end this comment with, but for purposes of which neither they nor Wotan are aware. But Spencer Millington are traditionalists unaware of Erda's more aggressive role in the musical syntax and underlying dramatic logic, viewing nature as passively acquiescent, a mere piece of the backdrop. Yet this love duet is in no way nature's categorical endorsement of Wälsung incest, but like all of Walküre, is fraught with ambivalence. True, Erda prizes empathetic love above all else, but a chasm lies between agape, the variety she favors, and the fully sexual passions of Eros, what the Wälsung twins rehearse in this duet, one which unwittingly serves Wotan's anti-natural schemes against the Earth Mother's natural prerogative. Thanks to Wagner's still potent faith in his opera and drama tenets, what follows is the closest thing to a duet he allows himself in Walküre, its overall vocal balance favoring Siegmund and apparently without new syntax. Lacking 2 brief reprises of its initial phrase in this love duet and the pair in Act 2, its Winterstürme melody is never again heard as a bona fide recurrent morpheme, and not even the redoubtable Cook suggests it bears any relationship to the work's evolving syntax. On closer examination, however, Winterstürme emerges as one of the Ring's pivotal morpheme bundles, a line packed with every bit as much syntactic data as Wotan's Rheingold inspiration triggering Walküre's events. Winterstürme is all but universally recognized, Spencer Millington and Sabor the only exceptions, though the others pay it little attention. Boltzogen calls it merely the famous magnificent song, without a musical example, while Kobe and Holman cite only its initial phrase, the latter opining, it does not develop additional motives. Newman, Hutchison, and Donington cite more, the latter's example with rudimentary accompaniment, as he calls it, Siegmund's love song of the coming of spring as his experience of fulfillment with the Sieglinde. This commentary finds it a syntactic feast, but its value, artistic or syntactic, is lost on at least one analyst. The melody is trivial and shallow. I confess to a positive dislike for this brief love song, which seems to me a cheap tune, unworthy of Wagner's genius. Porteous reveals even Wagner may have had misgivings. The effect should be not of a concert piece, but of an episode which delays rather than breaks the flow of the drama. Despite the Meister's reservations, and perhaps by his own design, it's the one audiences most likely hum when leaving the theater, the famed Walküre tattoo excepted. Yet even the redoubtable cook refers to Winterstürmer simply as an independent love motive, then says no more. It would seem a major compositional flaw if, in a work so crowded with syntax, this watershed moment didn't introduce some pivotal cell to recall its first genuine lovers. Never mind their faith that such passion rescues them from a mortal world hostile to agape. One of the epic's as yet undiscovered secrets does lurk embryonically within its initial phrase's sinuous turn. If slow to reveal that import in toto, once it flowers, this yet-to-be-evolved morpheme's impact is all the greater. Winterstürmer's deceptively simple tune bristles in a wealth of modules almost too rich to digest, yet, by this first act of the epic's second chapter, all of them with distinct syntactic implications in full process of evolution across the drama as they continue to mix as parts of new morphemes. Rests delineate its three phrases, what might be classed as a Barform, to Stollen with Abgesang. It floats on violins, violas as they take the woodwind horn oscillations over a cello pedal, its first measures retrograde heroic melody notes sinking into a motionless low F for the next 10. Siegmund's lulling strain begins with a module whose gentle down-up fourth bounce replicates that initiating the Welsung race. The inverted ash interval beginning it, however, moves the rhythmic emphasis to its downbeat, while still pairing an air de fourth descent and lift, the melody having but this single rising fourth against four descents, elusive harbingers of doom ameliorated on the spot as Siegmund ascends on heroic air de melody notes. This leads him to a sinuous crowning module, begun on chord notes, a cell which recurs 2 additional hopeful yet equivocal times. This winding module's heart, one of the tune's most luxurious, is a god turn, key cell of Wotan's Rheingold sword revelation, juxtaposing reverse melody notes with their originals to recall the god's conception of a bloodline triumphant over giant Nibelung forces opposing him. Here in Winterstürmer, the same racially charged connection opposes previous instances of the turn's giant version, especially those prominent in the Welsung's recent praise for Sieglinde. No part of Winterstürmer lacks a meaningful role in the work's syntax. After a quaver rest, the Welsung proceeds from its first to its second phrase, beginning on another air de fourth descent. Upon rising a third, he moves through a pair of chord notes linked by their reversal. While this is, in its way, the benediction of nature and music as well as words, its paired chord note oppositions add to the melody's subtle flux. Varying the initial phrase's conclusion, this next ends by rising on air de melody notes, their second appearance in the melody to underline the 2 phrases' question and answer form. Yet there's more afoot, this next Stollen ending with chord notes capped by melody notes, echoing an identical structure in the initial phrase. The Meister's supple emphasis of this question-answer shape is its own syntactic landmark, these 2 modules gently echoing a previous cell which, in Rheingold, marks sensuous passion, along with those giant turns which pepper the act. Winterstürme alleviates prior harsh connotations, however, by linking the modules to the Welsung's tenderness. This giant turn syntax manifests in three ways: its original full turn to suggest the Titan's bloodline, a partial first half with connotations of vitality built from reverse melody and chord notes, and a second imbued with longing as here, founded in original chord and melody notes. All three modules play these roles throughout the epic, the second half especially prominent in Walküre Act 3 for reasons discussed at that time to recall the budding love Siegmund here rehearses. The melody's third phrase begins on an echoing pair of modules, whose retrograde heroic melody notes cast doubt on that cell's initial Brave Rising version, whose tonic to the inverted ash interval launching Winterstürme is counteracted by the two retrogrades phrased as reverse ash intervals, capped in descending fourths. More equivocal still, Wotan's shadow looms over the phrase through the bouncing thirds. Siegmund has only just revived in calling for the sword, in echo of Wotan's original pronouncement. A winsome rising sixth initiates the second retrograde heroic melody pulse, eliminating its third bounce to mitigate this cloud, assisted by a seventh lift, Erda's inspiration, into the melody's final notes. But the Welsung instantly revives his father by sinking through a spear-like scale, ambivalence injected by its completion in a giant turn, complete with reverse melody notes set against their originals, to contradict that turn favoring Wotan's racial agenda, the same which initiates Winterstürme, a module destined to become central to the epic's most cryptic morpheme. This multifaceted ambiguity, essence both of this particular love music and the Ring as a whole, stands at the crux of an epic in which, by defending what they take for their best, Wotan and his creatures paradoxically fight to defeat the natural world's goodness as embodied in Erda. Winterstürme's most intriguing syntactic detail is close proximity of giant turns inverted with original, a backward echo of their similar conjunction in Rheingold, when Loge makes his final plea to Wotan on the Rhine Maiden's behalf. The fire god berates Warfather's feckless greed, the very same driving all the drama to come. Its morphemic conjunction in the twins' growing love here, a glance back at the wound his Welsungs are meant to heal, while looking forward to their ultimate role in that process. The Ring boasts three unabashed hymns to the natural world, Loge's Rheingold panegyric and Siegmund's spring song being the first two. The fire god's vision of nature is general, albeit focused on love, while the Welsung's turns on quasi-erotic personal metaphors. Holde Düfte hauscht aus, seinem warmen Blut entbluhen. Wonnige Blumen, Keim und Spross, entsprießt seiner Kraft. And it's unlikely to be happenstance that Siegfried should later be referred to as a Spross. Siegmund continues with what begins as a precise echo of Winterstürme's Abgesang, first clarinet obbligato joining oscillating strings to rise on a tonic crotchet arpeggio. The young hero leaps from upbeat to the clarinet's top note on the downbeat by replacing his former upward seventh with an octave, only his third among the few he ever sings. He slides from it on a spear scale, elongated to erase the giant turn, his terminal heroic rising fifth tailing out the phrase as a perfect anti-barrier. The clarinet obbligato, meanwhile, surmounts him, sinking on chord notes, moving the cello pedal to shake off its 10-measure stillness and descend through reverse melody notes into the Welsung's next phrase, into which he sinks on an answering octave plunge, another potently ambivalent touch. He then rises a fourth into an all-but-exact reprise of Winterstürme's Two Stolen, adding only his Welsung bounce to its Welsung race module. With Siegmund's penultimate reprise of his initial Stolen, cellos lift an octave to intertwine retrograde melody notes with contrabasses at a slight parallax. joining first clarinet's chord note descent on the second of its 3 dotted crotchet pedal measures, first oboe rises in heroic melody notes at a graceful parallax to those in the hero's vocal, then double his reverse melody notes and second stolen reprise. First clarinet sinks with it on reverse melody notes into a Welsung triad, followed by more reverse melody notes, at a parallax with first oboe's concluding triad, during the measure in which the young hero sustains the last pitch of his final stolen. On the following upbeat, he initiates a third reprise, bass clarinet joining first clarinet's retrograde heroic melody notes with a subtle ring fragment. Meanwhile, Siegmund's first stolen repeat lifts on a low ash interval, prophetic echo of renunciation of love, here followed by the Welsung race with its inverted ash interval. In this way, the hero erases that crucial turning module by adding a grace which converts it into the reverse melody notes of his racial potency, followed by reverse chord notes, all to prepare a third lift into his next cell, Freya's module, now specific to the Welsung's love, one he tails with chord notes. After a quaver rest, he concludes this first segment of his arioso, first with melody notes, a drop of a third and a fourth rise, to create a ringlust variant, then a downward seventh, capped in melody notes, making this terminal module another barrier. This analyse's most controversial aspect is likely ascription of syntactic weight to these minute cells. Some, like air to melody notes, their reversals and world ash intervals 3 notes in length. Others, such as air to chord notes falling rising fourths, fifths, and octaves, only 2. What Newman regards as mere ticks, of which Wagner is unaware, thus employs indiscriminately. Newman specifically claims the Freya morpheme is such an aberration, syntax long since identified as pivotal to the Welsung twins' empathetic bond, what Cook boldly calls the tetralogy's most important love morpheme. If Newman is correct, Winterstürme is a well-made tune, nothing more. The present text finds much to learn from its syntactic riches. What seems Wotan's triumph, as the Welsung's first Winterstürme complex finishes, subtly moves into Erda's camp with his second. That concluding barrier in particular, with its initial descending fifth, shifted to Erda's prescient seventh, is an embryonic precursor of syntax wedded to another Winterstürme cell, where it acquires a hallowed place in the ring's morphological dictionary. The music's energy increases with the Welsung's next 2 phrases, as he waxes still more eloquent on spring's power. Siegmund outlines 2 echoing phrases, his first an abandonment triad parsed as 2 low ash intervals on thirds to echo his twins' description of Wotan at the ash tree. Its irony that by sealing their bond he dooms Sieglinde to abandonment more painful than any other. Another low ash interval on reverse chord notes leads to this initial phrase's conclusion, that seductive turn whose third flattened to a second becomes Fasolt's longing for Freya. This module has a strong grip on Walküre syntax, side by side with the more complete giant turn, stressing the variant's similarity to Fasolt's love. Siegmund's next phrase, begun after a crotchet rest a third above his previous, moves through a static ash interval to again lift on that abandonment triad, this time unbroken by ash intervals and finished in a pair of flattened giant turns, thus both capped in melody notes, revealing itself here as Winterstürme's most prominent refrain. This sense of the Welsung's sensual betrayal of Wotan's agenda, endorsed by repeated affirmations of the Earth Mother's seemingly deliberate guidance, is underlined in the woodwind horned obligato's prominent lifts through abandonment melody notes. String pulse continued throughout. Identical in each phrase, but for the second's increased doublings, woodwinds underline both the triad's rise and its melody notes, albeit horns crafting each of those modules with Valhalla ash intervals, and Erda-fourth lifts harking back to Swords Chosen, godly power investing Siegmund's passion nonetheless. The Welsung's next phrase, begun at a quaver delay, lifts through air-to melody notes and a Welsung bounce, then rises a third and slides down extended reverse melody notes with their sense of his race's burgeoning power. From their last note, he rises a sixth on a low ash interval to fall through a Welsung triad into reverse melody notes and scalar lift, another subtle evocation of the giant turn. Interrupted first by a quaver, then dotted crotchet rest isolating the word uns, his continued scalar lift finishes on a truncated barrier, phrased through another low ash interval on reverse chord notes. The orchestra's swell crests with him, dramatically punctuating his declaration in crotchet chords on the measure's first and middle beats, the climax of a text bristling with ripe sexual metaphors. Wohl musste dem tapferen Streichen die strenge Türe auch weichen, die trotzig und starr uns trennte von ihm. A triple meter shift inaugurates the wordless elegiac change of mood, buoyed by rolling demi-semiquaver natural up-down viola signs with underlining horn pedal, first harp soaring a measure's semiquaver arpeggio, answered on the next downbeat by first-second harp's natural up-down sign. Woodwinds ride these sinuous waves by trading a languorous pair of Welsung Love's sensual loge modules. Resuming a quaver into the harp sign's descent, Siegmund expands on the lyric's incestuous hints as he rises through an abandonment triad, doubled by horns woodwinds, its top notes a high ash interval. Horns, woodwinds fade on air-to chords, crotchet chord followed by a quaver, to underscore the chord notes of his Freya love module, in that dreamily longing form now firmly associated with the twins' mutual affection. First violins doubling him as low strings establish a series of pedal chords, broad viola signs continuing throughout. He follows with a second love iteration, again doubled by first violins, from which he sinks a fourth to ascend a poignant sixth, during which first clarinet lifts through a tonic quaver arpeggio into the sensuous love cell in the next measure of the Welsung's hell-dotted minim. From it he sinks on broad chord notes as second clarinet ascends another tonic arpeggio, this one answered by first oboe's sensuous love pulse as he floats up another hopeful rising scale. With its last note, first-second clarinets harmonize a Welterbe triad in thirds, as first harp takes its quaver arpeggio into the next measure, harmony sliding into minor. Siegmund intones his persecuted love metaphor on 2 third bounces, hinting at Wotan's inspiration and his own recent echo, the two cells separated by a fourth descent and rise, that distinctive Welsung throb, though without its syncopation. First violins descant him with another and stronger pair of chromatic love strophes, each capped in a rising quaver harp arpeggio, threaded by opposing woodwind violin crotchets which muddle the abandonment triad with its competing Welterbe triad. As the mode surges back to major, he leaps up a joyful triplet first inversion distortion of the heroic melody notes, as he delights over the twins' emergence into spring's light, another reference to the moon. A phrase he caps on a chord note opposition, lingering muscularly through a semi-breve on its chord notes, to finish his phrase with yet another barrier. First violins punctuate his melody notes, their abandonment triad ascent topped on a turn resembling Sieglinde's earlier kindness, and his dotted minim initiating the next downbeat. Both violin choirs join the demi-semiquaver viola signs as they lift on tonic notes, while woodwind's horns lift a tonic arpeggio, flutes at its top shifted to quavers stressing an abandonment triad. Tuplet harp arpeggios embellish this measure, each of their downward semiquavers lifting through tonic notes to punch the next downbeat with a quaver chord. With this, violin-viola sign harmonies sync on tonic notes as cellos race up a semiquaver triplet arpeggio grace into a tonic quaver arpeggio descent. Capping this measure's second beat, first flute, clarinet, bassoon twirl another still more rapturous raced Sieglinde turn, which, coupled with its final upward leaping sixth, is a module destined to find its definitive voice only in Götterdämmerung. So far, the love music turns on the subtle morphemic conflict between Wotan's desires for his children and Erda's hopes of subsuming those to revitalize her natural world, a struggle intensified by the Welsung's next phrase, with its return to that energetic pulse immediately following the sequence's initial Winterstürme refrains. Siegmund's two phrases seem to echo those of his earlier pair, though notably altered. Rising here on a fourth, he climbs through a trio of melody notes, which, together with their initial chord note slides, form that sensual turn evoking Fasold. This phrase passes so quickly an audience can only perceive it as a livelier repeat of his prior vocal, even as it hammers out embryonic syntax. After fourth lift and melody notes, details picked up from Swords Chosen, the pair of truncated giant turns from the earlier syntax's initial phrase repeat in the Welsung's present vocal, his third drop adding a chagrin pulse. As this abbreviated giant turn module permeates the following two acts, its reminder of the hero's muscular optimism gradually merges with his deep tragedy, while further confirming Erda guides these events even more so than Wotan. The Welsung begins his second phrase with another rising fourth, its contours breaking from his prior syntax into pure heroic melody notes, embellished on bouncing thirds as in his appeal for the sword. Capped by a heroic rising fifth, this module also portentously incorporates Ringlust. He completes his phrase on that joyful quasi-Rhine maiden cell which, with its Welsung triad backbone, recurs so often throughout the epic as a reminder of his natural vitality. This analysis dubs it Welsung joy. Supporting these paired phrases, violas continue their steady pulsing signs, the other strings capping pizzicato quaver chords on first and last beat of each measure. With the first measure of each phrase, first harp's chords rise on each beat to strum an arpeggio lift with the next downbeat, their sextuplets ending his first phrase, demi-semi-quavers for his second, horn woodwind chords supporting first oboe, then oboe clarinet in a pair of answering love pulses, shorn of chord note finishes. Each of his phrases begins in minor to swiftly shift to major, that quick major-minor-major oscillation typical of the Earth Mother's unseen presence, a touch which also confirms the lyric sense of emerging from adversity into triumph. These conflicting markers of race, Wotan's schemes, and the ambivalence of Erda's nature continue to hang over the Welsung's budding incestuous joy, though Siegmund ends his arietta in an ecstatic glow. Strung with rising harp arpeggios on each measure's first beat, his broad vocal arc recalls his earlier elation, here avoiding its quasi-ring fragment descent by replacing it with chord notes and a Wilderb triad, then a fourth bounce with its breath of his race's syntax, against horns rising falling arc, their descent on crotchet extended reverse melody notes at a parallax delay from those rising in his own vocal, as he again avoids an abandonment triad. With this last half of the young hero's sign, woodwinds ascend on triplet chord pulses while, after dipping a fifth to lift a glorious sixth that dispels all sense of ringlust, Siegmund sustains a high F for nearly a breve. During it, horns strengthen continued woodwind pulses, and a harp arpeggio's three triplet semi-quavers triggers violins to climb a quaver arpeggio into another, still more elated sensual love iteration, darkened almost tragically with yet another shift to minor. He sinks from his F on chord notes into an anti-barrier, whose top note he sustains on the next downbeat, his high F held a semi-breve that inspires a radiant shift back to major, horn woodwind pulse swelling as cellos intone a Winterstürme strophe. With its last reverse melody iteration on the next downbeat, woodwind cease as flute clarinet's horns sustain a minim quaver chord over a last pair of viola signs, Siegmund dropping a fourth. In a quaver's worth of dramatic silence across the ensemble, he finishes on a third descent. The Welsung's final minim B-flat with the next downbeat initiates his arioso's brief three-measure coda underpinned by a pedal across the full horn choir, violins caroling a rapturous if truncated Winterstürme strophe, violas resuming their signs by lifting on restrained semiquavers, each a semiquaver off the beat, triplet woodwind pulses strengthened, cello's crotchet sign and abandonment into a Welsung triad, as two harps lift in opposing semiquaver triplet signs. The Winterstürme cell expands through an ascending reverse melody note series elided by abandonment triads, a recall precise to its syncopation of Siegmund's guilt and Sieglinde's attempts to shield him from her raging husband. This preface to her answer, lauding a man she's yet to realize is her brother, brings with it a sense of his racial attraction overpowering his threat. Adding to this subtly equivocal mix with its last measure, cello crotchets oppose a Weltherb triad together with English horns abandonment triad at a parallax against horns as part of a giant arpeggio, while first flute, first oboe, first clarinet sync on the reverse melody notes of Siegmund's lineage. If invisible to the ear, these details are crystal clear in the orchestral score, Wagner's ticks at work on a high level of narrative precision. This syntactic revelation climaxes on the next measure's downbeat, half the woodwinds freezing in a dotted crotchet chord, while with violins the other half doubles Sieglinde's vocal air de chord notes as she takes stage. That's it for now. My aim is to keep these videos close to a half hour instead of longer ones, which make this an endurance test. The next video picks up where this one leaves off as Sieglinde begins her part of the famous love duet, page 112 in Dover's full score. As always, thanks for watching and please do leave your comments below. Time and energy allowing, I'll do everything I can to respond. Lastly, as all YouTubers know, your subscription to this channel by itself is a huge assist in completing this vast project. Hit the bell to be notified of the next videos. With luck and your support, there's a lot more to come.